In late May of 1925, a well-dressed man boarded a train pulling out of Paris. Days earlier, a Paris businessman had handed over payment, certain he had just bought the rights to tear the Eiffel Tower down for scrap. The man on the train was already gone, and so was the money. For weeks before that morning, the man, Victor Lustig, had worked out of a rented room inside the Hotel de Crillon, overlooking the Place de la Concorde. It stood among the most prestigious addresses in Paris. The businessman he left behind was Andre Poisson, holding a signed contract on the letterhead of the Ministère des Postes et Télégraphes, France's real postal and telegraph ministry. The paper looked official enough to convince Poisson he had bought the genuine piece of French government business. The deal itself, and the official who signed it, existed nowhere else. Lustig was no novice at this. Long before he checked into the Crillon, he had built a career swindling passengers on transatlantic ocean liners. He refined his patter with each voyage. He had also run at least one documented land fraud years earlier. The Eiffel Tower swindle was his boldest performance yet, not his first. Within months, Lustig would try the very same scheme again, on a second group of Paris scrap dealers, a return trip that ended very differently. Yet despite the story's enduring fame, no French criminal case file or trial record for the Eiffel Tower affair has ever been produced, a gap the record has never closed. Victor Lustig entered the world on January 4, 1890, in Hostin, a small Bohemian town then folded into Austria-Hungary. His father, Ludwig Lustig, sold tobacco and had once held a minor post in local town government. Nothing about that quiet birthplace hinted at the elaborate confidence man Lustig would become, one who would later claim connections far grander than a tobacco seller's son. Biographers describe Lustig as strikingly multilingual, comfortable slipping between tongues as easily as identities. He spoke German, French, English, and Italian, each fluent enough to pass as native in the right company. That fluency became his passport into salons, dining cars, and boardrooms across Europe and America, letting him move through high society without ever quite belonging to it. Before Paris, Lustig had already found his stage, the transatlantic ocean liners that ran between France and New York. He posed as a producer, scouting investors for stage productions that only existed in his patter. Wealthy passengers, bored on long crossings, proved easy marks, and Lustig refined his method, voyage after voyage, crossing after crossing. In May 1922, Lustig turned that patter into real crime, posing as Robert Duval to defraud a bank in Springfield, Missouri. He overpaid for land using Liberty bonds, then walked away with roughly $10,000 in cash. Arrested soon after, he was extradited from New York to face the charge. Long before the Crillon, Lustig was already known for the Romanian box, a rigged mahogany device he sold as a machine that could duplicate paper currency overnight. Marx watched it seemingly print a second bill from the first, then paid dearly to own one. The device rarely worked twice, but by then, Lustig was gone. By the time Lustig reached Paris in 1925, his method had a clear shape. He researched a plausible institutional story, forged paperwork convincing enough to survive scrutiny, and let a greedy mark talk himself into the fraud. That formula, honed on ships and in Missouri, was what he carried into the Hotel de Crillon. Even Lustig's own origin story has holes. 2015 investigation by Hostin historian Thomas Andel turned up no school enrollment record or documentary proof that Lustig was actually born in the town. It is an early sign that much of his biography rests on nothing sturdier than his own uncorroborated claims. The Eiffel Tower gave Victor Lustig an opening because his own history made demolition sound plausible. Engineers built it as a temporary marvel to crown the World's Fair of 1889, the Exposition Universelle. The permit granted by the city was explicit. After 20 years, the tower was to be dismantled and its iron sold off. Exactly the fate Lustig would later claim was finally arriving. The demolition was a documented fact, not an invention. Gustave Eiffel spent those 2 decades fighting to save his tower. As the 1909 deadline for destruction approached, he offered the structure to the French military as a platform for radio antennas. The offer worked. Officials extended the tower's concession by 70 years, starting the 1st of January 1910, but its survival still depended on continued government goodwill. The concessions renewal made the tower's long-term future once again a matter of politics rather than certainty. By the mid-1920s, Paris newspapers were still writing about the tower's troubles. Reporters described rusting ironwork, the enormous cost of repainting its iron lattice, and lingering questions about who should pay for its upkeep. Lustig is reported to have read this very coverage shortly after he arrived in Paris in 1925. Parisians in 1925 could also look up and see the tower's uncertain status lit in electric letters. That year, illuminated Citroën advertising signs appeared along its sides, turning the monument into a giant billboard. To anyone paying attention, it was visible proof that the Eiffel Tower's finances and future were still unsettled business. Locals debated whether a national monument should double as a corporate advertisement, a debate that only underscored how contested the tower's identity had become. Lustig built his fraud on paper before he ever spoke a word to his marks. He hired a forger to produce stationery bearing the letterhead of the real Ministère des Postes et Telegraphs, the government ministry that plausibly might oversee such a demolition. On that forged letterhead, he drafted invitations to a small, confidential meeting. He sent those invitations to a short list of Paris's leading scrap metal dealers, men whose businesses depended on knowing which deals to trust. Lustig checked into the Hotel de Crillon on the Place de la Concorde, one of the city's grandest addresses, and told the assembled dealers he was the ministry's deputy director general, sworn to secrecy. Lustig explained the secrecy this way. Public reaction to losing the Eiffel Tower would be severe if word leaked before a decision was final. His pitch offered the dealers a chance to bid for the rights to demolish the tower and take possession of thousands of tons of scrap iron, framing the invitation itself as proof of his trust in their honesty. He settled on Andre Poisson, described in multiple accounts as new to Paris business circles. Poisson was eager to be seen among the city's established players. To keep the fiction alive, Lustig arranged a second private visit to the tower itself. He reportedly carried forged credentials that let his small group bypass the ordinary ticket line entirely. Afterward, Lustig pulled Poisson aside for a quieter conversation, away from the other dealers. He confided that his government salary left him underpaid. In exchange for a personal bribe, he offered to guarantee that Poisson's bid alone would win the contract. That request is the detail most retellings treat as psychologically decisive. A bureaucrat asking for money on the side felt more believable to Poisson than one who refused it outright. The exact sums involved shift from source to source. Some accounts describe a personal bribe of roughly 70,000 francs on top of the separate demolition rights payment, reported by one account as roughly 1.2 million francs. Some retellings collapse the whole payment into a single figure near 70,000 francs. One profile of Lustig instead cites a single check for 100,000. That disagreement among otherwise similar accounts is itself telling, worth pausing over. No primary financial record, no bank draft, no court exhibit has ever surfaced to fix the true amount. The numbers survive only through retellings and Lustig's own later boasting, not through paperwork anyone can independently verify today, which leaves the precise cost of the swindle permanently uncertain. Poisson paid whatever the true sum and received his forged demolition paperwork in return. He believed he had won a lucrative scrap iron contract, one covered in more detail in the section that follows. He also believed, more valuably in his own mind, that he had gained a discreet friend inside the French government, a connection worth protecting through his own silence. After collecting the payment, Lustig slipped out of Paris almost immediately. One account traces his route through Lyon, then across the Italian border, before he reached Vienna, Austria. Weeks later, Andre Poisson went to follow up on his new contract in person. He visited the real Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs offices in Paris to confirm his rights. Clerks there had never heard of any tower demolition. No one recognized the name or the official title Lustig had claimed. The office simply had no file on the matter at all. He had paid for demolition rights to a landmark that was never actually for sale. He had also handed over a private bribe, believing it bought him influence over the fake official. Both payments were gone, and so was the man who had taken them, without a trace. Biographers researching the case largely agree on what came next. Nothing. Poisson never walked into a police station over the swindle. He never filed a report naming Victor Lustig or his crime. The shame of being so easily fooled, after trying to buy his way into Paris's business elite, kept him from ever going to the police. No Paris newspaper ran a single word about the swindle. No detective came looking for the con man from the Crillon. No French police file on the first Eiffel Tower swindle has ever surfaced. No prosecution record exists in any archive that researchers have searched. The reason keeps coming back to one simple fact. Poisson never complained to anyone. Without a victim's complaint, there was no case for police to open, and none for history to preserve. Later in 1925, sources disagree on exactly when Lustig came back to Paris, placing his return anywhere from the following month to several months after the Poisson swindle. Whatever the timing, he gathered a fresh circle of scrap metal dealers and told them the very same story, that the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs was secretly demolishing the Eiffel Tower for scrap. Accounts of how this second attempt collapsed disagree sharply with one another. Several biographers say one targeted dealer grew suspicious of the story and quietly alerted the police before any money changed hands. A Czech language profile of Lustig tells it differently, describing him simply walking away after a prospective buyer demanded guarantees he had no way of providing. What sources agree on is that this second attempt, unlike the earlier and successful swindle, actually drew attention from French authorities. Some accounts add that Paris newspapers covered an attempted fraud connected to the tower, though no one has ever located that coverage. This makes the failed attempt the one moment official scrutiny is said to have entered the story at all. Facing the real possibility of arrest, Lustig chose flight over any confrontation with the French police. Rather than risk capture in Paris, he crossed the Atlantic for the United States, leaving the unfinished second swindle behind him for good. This is the only documented instance of official or press involvement anywhere in the entire Eiffel Tower affair. Because of that single detail, researchers treat this failed second attempt as the more verifiable episode. That is a strange twist, given how much better remembered the earlier, wildly successful swindle against Andre Poisson has become. No researcher has ever produced a surviving French police report naming Lustig in connection with either attempt. No newspaper clipping and no court record have surfaced either, despite decades of searching by journalists and biographers alike. The entire episode rests almost entirely on later retellings and Lustig's own boasting, not on paper, that survives from 1925 itself. After arriving in the United States, Lustig continued using confidence schemes, and in 1930 he conducted one against Al Capone himself in Chicago. He asked for $50,000 from the gangster as an investment, then returned the entire amount untouched. Capone, impressed by the apparent honesty, gave Lustig a smaller reward as a gesture of goodwill, precisely the outcome Lustig had engineered from the start. Starting in 1930, Lustig partnered with two Nebraska associates, William Watts and Tom Shaw, in a counterfeiting ring. Roughly 5 years, their forged American currency circulated through banks and businesses across the country. The operation proved durable, evading capture far longer than any single swindle could have lasted on its own. Federal agents arrested Lustig in New York on the 10th of May, 1935. He escaped custody at a federal detention facility that September the 1st and was free for 27 days before recapture in Pittsburgh. That December, a court sentenced him to serve his time at Alcatraz. Lustig died of pneumonia on the 11th of March 1947 at the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. His death certificate listed him under an alias, Robert V. Miller, not the name history remembers. Even in death, the con man left one more layer of disguise behind. As mentioned earlier, even Lustig's own hometown could not confirm his claimed birth record. The vivid dialogue, exact frank figures, and dramatic confrontations trace back chiefly to Lustig's own later boasting, repeated by journalists and biographers. What remains is a solid record that is more limited than the legend around it. Historians can confirm forged government stationery, a real meeting at the Hotel de Crillon, named and humiliated victim Andre Poisson, and a second attempt that finally drew police attention. The fraud endures not because every detail is proven, but because its believable core never needed exaggeration. That was this story here on Errata. If you enjoy forgotten history told accuracy first, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like, and we will keep bringing the past back to light.